The day I was fired, my husband was promoted, using my work. That's not an exaggeration. Not poetic license. It's exactly what happened. I was standing in a conference room with HR, hands still shaking from an unfinished presentation, when I got the news. They said it was a restructuring. I knew better. My ideas had just landed in a pitch deck 2 floors up, only now they had my husband's name on them. Let me backtrack. My name's Macy. I'm 29, a corporate lawyer, or I was until 3 weeks ago. I'd spent 6 years building my reputation in that firm. Not through networking mixers or office politics, but through quiet, grueling excellence. I was the one who stayed late and rewrote flawed contracts. The one who caught details others missed. I never needed applause, I just wanted impact. I thought that would be enough. I met David 3 years ago. He was charming in a way that felt effortless. The type who knew everyone's name by day 2 and made interns laugh during lunch. I wasn't supposed to fall for someone in the same building. But we ended up in the same late-night deposition review, and the rest unfolded the way office romances often do, fast, quietly, and suddenly very real. His family welcomed me with polite distance. The kind that felt performative. His mother, Jeanette, was an ex-corporate strategist, now wrapped in legacy foundations and charity boards. His father, Stuart, talked in quotes from business books and called me sharp for a litigator. I didn't care. I wasn't there for them. I was there for the man who stayed up with me before trials, who whispered encouragement into my shoulder at 3 a.m. At least, I thought I was. The cracks didn't start obvious. They never do. It was little things, him taking my drafts, just to look at, his sudden rise to lead strategist on a project I'd built from the ground up, and the eerie silence after I submitted a proposal that never got a reply. Then I'd hear Jeanette mention David's restructuring plan at a brunch I wasn't invited to. My plan. My work. With his name. I told myself I was overreacting. That's what women are trained to do. Doubt ourselves before confronting betrayal. But then came the email. A reply meant for someone else. His assistant forwarding the internal project timeline to a team thread. My documents, my exact wording, pasted under David's credentials. No footnote. No mention. Not even a hint. I printed it out. Took it to HR. I wasn't naive, I didn't expect a parade. Just recognition. Maybe an apology. What I got instead was a sit-down, a handshake, and a termination letter dressed in legal euphemisms. Thank you for your contributions. Best of luck moving forward. They even offered a reference. I remember walking past the glass hallway, watching David smiling with a team I had trained. He didn't look my way. Maybe he didn't think I'd fight back. Maybe he thought I'd leave quietly, like a good, disposable asset. But what he and his legacy-obsessed family didn't understand was that I wasn't raised to be a shadow. I went home that night numb. Not crying. Not angry. Just still. Like my body was conserving energy for something it hadn't decided on yet. The apartment looked the same, sterile, expensive, carefully arranged for appearances. A place where people lived when they needed to impress others. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing. My phone buzzed. A message from Jeanette. We know this must be hard. Let us know if you need support. Support? From the same woman who asked for a peek at my legal notes last month for a mentor client of hers? From the woman who now hosted panels quoting phrases I'd written in memos? I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my external drive. The one I never talked about. The one that held every draft, every email chain, every time-stamped edit I'd made over the last year. Not to trap anyone. Just because I never trusted office servers. They underestimated the wrong woman. I didn't sleep. I organized. Compiled. Reviewed. What started as damage control turned into a dossier. A living, breathing archive of theft wrapped in polite smiles. At 5:42 a.m., I sent one email. Not to HR. Not to David. But to a former colleague who now worked in compliance at the SEC. It was simple. Thought you'd want to see this. No attachments. Just a line. Call me if you're serious. Then I shut the laptop and waited, not for revenge, but for the moment the silence would break. And when it did, I would no longer be the woman left out of the story. I would be the one writing it. I didn't expect a response that morning, but I got one before noon. A missed call from a number I didn't recognize, followed by a short message from my former colleague. Got your note. I'm listening. We met at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. He didn't wear a suit, just a jacket and a look that told me he knew what I was about to hand him could burn bridges. I handed over a flash drive. He plugged it into his tablet and began scrolling through files without a word. Every few seconds, he paused, eyes narrowing. "I assume you kept backups," he said finally. "3." He nodded, then leaned back. "They've been laundering your work through strategic repositioning. That's not just unethical. It's potentially criminal, especially if grant funding or shareholder reports were involved." "They were," I said. He asked a few more questions. Then he stood and said, "This may take time. You good with that?" "I've got time," I said. And nothing left to lose. But that wasn't entirely true. I still had my name. And they were already trying to claim that too. That night, I opened LinkedIn for the first time in weeks. I didn't post anything. Just watched. David had updated his profile. Lead strategy architect for legacy innovations. My project. My blueprint. Now branded as a startup, fully backed by a foundation connected to his mother's board. It wasn't just betrayal. It was full-scale identity theft dressed as career evolution. Worse, I discovered they'd filed for a patent on one of the proprietary frameworks I'd drafted months earlier, under his name. They didn't just erase me. They copied my fingerprint and called it their own. I wanted to scream. Instead, I documented. Screenshots. Dates. Corroborating emails. I began compiling what I now called the disappearance file. Not because I had vanished, but because they were trying to pretend I never existed in the first place. Then came the final insult. An invitation. A formal, printed card slid under my door a week later. "You are cordially invited to the launch gala of Legacy Innovations, honoring David Sterling's vision and strategic genius." No mention of me. But the event was hosted at a venue I'd once recommended for a charity case we'd handled together. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were celebrating their theft in public. And they thought I would sit home and watch from the sidelines. Quiet. Defeated. But I wasn't the woman who cried in bathrooms anymore. I wasn't the one who begged for acknowledgement. I had been that woman. And she was gone. Instead of attending, I made a phone call. I contacted a journalist I'd helped once during a pro bono defamation case. She owed me. I told her I had a story, not gossip, but something verifiable. Legal theft. Reputation laundering. Corporate exploitation. All packaged under the label of innovation. She didn't hesitate. "Send what you have. I'll run it through legal. If it clears, we go live within 48 hours. The day of the gala, my story was scheduled to drop at 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes after their opening champagne toast. I didn't wear a dress. I didn't get in a cab. I stayed home, lit a candle, and watched the fallout in real time. It started with texts. First from a former colleague. "Did you just nuke their launch?" Then another. "This expose is wild. You're trending." By 7:15, the article had been shared across 3 major business pages. The title was direct. "The Woman Behind the Curtain: How One Legal Strategist Was Erased from Her Own Vision." It didn't name me as the victim. It named me as the architect. I didn't smear them. I didn't speculate. I just told the truth with proof. By 8 o'clock, their PR team released a vague statement. "We respect all contributors and are reviewing concerns internally." By 10 o'clock, investors began pulling out. That night, my phone buzzed again. A name I hadn't seen in weeks, David. I didn't answer. The voicemail was almost laughable. "Hey, we didn't mean for it to go like this. Can we talk? Please." No, we couldn't talk. Because talking requires respect. And he had traded mine for applause. Instead, I opened my email and drafted a message to the patent office. I attached the original timestamped files, embedded screenshots, and the forwarded memo proving the design was mine. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. I wasn't vindictive. I was simply done being invisible. They wanted to write me out of the story. I just published a better version, one with footnotes, receipts, and my name spelled correctly. The aftermath didn't explode, it unraveled. One thread at a time. The morning after the article dropped, my inbox was full. Some messages were from people I hadn't spoken to in years, colleagues who once dismissed me, now writing things like, "You always had more guts than we gave you credit for." One even asked if I was open to consulting. I didn't reply. Not yet. This wasn't about rebuilding. It was about finishing what they started. I checked the press again. The article had been syndicated, picked up by 2 more outlets. The comments underneath were mixed, some praising me, others downplaying it as just workplace drama. I didn't care. I hadn't done this for strangers. But someone I hadn't expected reached out. Jeanette. An email. The subject line read, "Let's talk." The message was short. "Macy, this isn't how professionals resolve things. We could have worked it out internally. What you've done, this public spectacle, only damages your own credibility. Let's be civil and handle this face-to-face. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a command framed as diplomacy." I stared at her words for a while. Then I archived the message. I didn't delete it. I wanted it there, visible, preserved, like a plaque on the wall of a war museum. By Friday, it was clear the investigation into David's startup had begun. Someone from the SEC contacted me with follow-up questions. I answered calmly, factually. No emotion. Just the truth, which, unlike their press releases, didn't require rehearsing. But the most surreal moment came 2 days later when a box showed up at my door. No note. No return address. Inside, a binder full of legal documents and IP registration forms. My original drafts. The real ones. The ones I'd only stored digitally. They had been printed, tabbed, highlighted. Someone had kept a copy. I checked the postmark. It was hand-delivered. Then I saw the small yellow sticky note, barely attached to the last page. "You weren't crazy. I saw it happen. Thought you should have this. See." I read it 3 times. See, Cassandra. She was one of David's former assistants, always quiet, always a little too observant for their liking. I hadn't seen her since the week I was let go. Now I knew why. She'd left too. This wasn't just me anymore. Others had seen it. Chosen silence. Or survival. But now they were stepping out. For once, I wasn't alone. That changed everything. Later that evening, a small blog published an op-ed titled, "The Cost of Being Erased: What Happens When Women's Work Gets Rebranded by Men in Power." It didn't name me directly, but it quoted the article. Quoted me. It ended with a line that stayed in my head long after the screen went dark. Credit is not given. It's often taken. And sometimes, the only way to reclaim it is to speak loud enough that even those who chose not to see can't ignore you anymore. I exhaled. Then came the retaliation. By Monday, a thinly veiled article appeared in a Business Digest, anonymously sourced, claiming I had exaggerated my contributions. They even hinted that I'd emotionally manipulated David during the relationship to gain influence. It was textbook. Reframe the story. Paint the woman as unstable, emotional, calculating. It had all the subtle venom of a smear campaign, dressed in corporate language. I didn't panic. I printed it. And then I made a call. Not to media. Not to friends. To a pro bono lawyer I'd mentored years ago. She now worked for a nonprofit that protected whistleblowers and women in corporate litigation. She picked up on the first ring. "I read everything," she said before I could speak. "And we're ready to back you if this escalates." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a personal battle anymore. This was structural, predictable, widespread. And I had accidentally become a case study. Good. Let them see what happens when the woman they tried to erase keeps every receipt and learns how to build a microphone from the debris. I wasn't done. Next stop, the patent board. I'd filed an injunction against the approval of David's registration. Now I had added evidence, the original draft, the IP delivery logs, and the sticky note from Cassandra. It wasn't just enough to stall the approval. It was enough to flag the entire submission. I watched the status update change online from "in review" to "suspended pending investigation." A small line. But it might as well have been a headline. David had stopped calling. Jeanette too. Their silence no longer felt powerful. It felt cornered. And I was just getting started. The hearing wasn't dramatic. Most real ones aren't. There were no slammed fists, no shouting across court benches, just documented timelines, expert statements, and the undeniable trail of ownership that pointed back to me. That was the advantage of being methodical. I hadn't just kept evidence, I'd made it irrefutable. David didn't speak much. He sat at the table with his lawyer, scrolling through a tablet, eyes never rising. Jeanette didn't show. According to court filings, she'd stepped down from the board of her foundation to focus on private matters. Translation: Fallout containment. When my name was called, I walked to the stand, spine straight. I didn't have to tell a story. The exhibits did that for me, side-by-side comparisons of my drafts and the stolen patent filings, time-stamped edits, source metadata. And then, the final piece, the envelope Cassandra had sent me. I'd reached out to her after receiving it. She didn't want to testify, but she allowed her note to be submitted with an affidavit. That was enough. Their legal team tried to argue ambiguity. Collaboration, they said. Gray area. But when the board read my final submission aloud, complete with internal correspondence showing David directly forwarding my work and deleting my name, it became very clear. There was no gray. The ruling came 3 days later. Patent denied. Filing voided. Investigative recommendation issued for further action. The decision made headlines in the legal and tech community. One outlet called it a milestone in workplace IP abuse accountability. Another headline read, "She didn't burn the house down. She changed the locks." But none of that gave me what I really wanted. Not revenge. Recognition? Maybe. But more than that, relief. I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. What I felt was heavy. Like I'd been running with a weight tied to my back and only now realized how long it had been there. And then, just when I thought the noise was quieting, I got a message that ripped the floor out from under me. It was from my bank. Suspicious activity detected on your business account ending in 0942. Please review attached statements. I opened the file. $7,500 transferred out. An account I hadn't touched in months. One I'd only used briefly while working freelance during the legal battle. I checked the recipient, an LLC registered under a name I didn't recognize, but with an address I did. Jeanette's former foundation. I sat frozen. My account hadn't just been accessed, it had been drained strategically. Quietly. This wasn't clumsiness. This was targeted. I called the fraud department, initiated a freeze, and began gathering paperwork. Again. 2 hours later, I received an email with a subject line I didn't expect. From Cassandra. Subject, "You should see this." Attached, a screen recording. Her phone screen showed a voice memo sent from David to someone named Blake, another former intern of his. In it, David was ranting. Agitated. Sloppy. "She thinks she won. She doesn't know anything. We're already redirecting assets. It's not over." I played it 3 times. Memorized the tone. Saved it under a folder labeled Proof. It was never about the work. It was about control. Even after everything, they still thought I could be bent. Outmaneuvered. Silenced. They had taken my work. My name. And now they were trying to take what I'd built after the storm. They didn't want me erased. They wanted me indebted. That night, I sat down and drafted a formal complaint again. But this time, not for exposure. This was for prosecution. Financial fraud. Identity misrepresentation. Wire tampering. My attorney reviewed it. Said it could trigger criminal charges. I nodded. Signed. Sent it. The moment I did, I didn't feel scared. I felt finished. Not because I had nothing left to fight for. Because I finally understood they weren't powerful. They were just practiced manipulators. And I had mistaken that for strength. 2 days later, the district office acknowledged receipt. An investigation had begun. David would be subpoenaed. Financial audits were underway. I watched it unfold from a distance, not bitter, just focused. They had bet on my silence. I had learned how to turn silence into evidence. They had bet on my shame. I had chosen clarity. And now, they were the ones left waiting, hoping the damage wouldn't follow them. But damage doesn't ask for permission. It just waits for the right moment to return the favor. The criminal complaint changed everything. For the first time, the silence didn't feel tactical. It felt like retreat. David didn't post anything. His once busy LinkedIn page had gone dark. Jeanette's foundation website quietly redirected to a blank placeholder. No press releases. No statements. Just absence. But absence speaks when it comes from people who never stopped performing. The district office confirmed the investigation had opened a formal case. The funds drained from my account had been traced to a shell company connected to 3 other similar incidents. Mine had simply been the loudest. Cassandra, after seeing the voice memo used in the report, reached out again. She'd spoken with others, assistants, interns, junior staff, who'd witnessed similar manipulation. One had even filed a complaint years ago that was buried quietly by internal counsel. What was once personal was now collective. And I was done pretending it wasn't. Meanwhile, my life outside the case had become eerily calm. I wasn't working full-time. I'd paused most consulting. My days were quiet, structured. I answered what I needed to, ignored what I didn't. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived. Hand-delivered. No sender listed. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single typed letter. No signature. Whatever happens, I want you to know we never meant to hurt you. Things got complicated. The choices we made weren't personal. Please don't escalate this further. Think of your future. Let it end here. No name. But the phrasing was familiar. Jeanette's tone. Her strategy. I read it twice. Then dropped it in the shredder without hesitation. That was the difference now. I no longer felt the urge to frame every insult, every slight. Some things didn't deserve preservation. 2 weeks later, I was asked to speak at a closed legal forum. Topic: the ethical cost of silence in professional spaces. I agreed, but only under one condition: no titles, no accolades. I didn't want applause. I wanted change. The room was full of people who looked like they'd never been interrupted in a meeting. Mid-career lawyers, firm partners, policy advisors. I stepped to the mic and told them what happened, not in dramatic fashion, but like reading a deposition. They listened. Because I didn't speak like someone telling a sad story. I spoke like someone who'd lived the consequences of their inaction. Afterwards, 3 women approached me quietly. One had once clerked for Jeanette. Another said she recognized the tactics. A third admitted she'd followed my story online, but hadn't known how to help. I told them the same thing I told myself every morning: you don't have to help fix everything. Just stop pretending you don't see it. Weeks passed. Then months. The audit concluded. David was fined. The LLC dissolved. The court barred him from holding fiduciary control of any registered business for the next 5 years. Jeanette wasn't charged, at least not publicly, but her influence evaporated. No more panels. No more mentorship posts. Just silence again. But this time earned. And me? I didn't publish a final statement. I didn't announce closure. Instead, I rented a small space downtown and started over. Not a firm. Not yet. Just a resource office. Legal support for early career women who wanted contracts reviewed, portfolios protected, IP locked down. No branding. Just action. One night, while organizing files, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. I read about the case. I was one of them too. I never reported it. But seeing you in, it changed something. Thank you. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't need to. Some stories don't need full names to be real. Later that week, someone from a law journal contacted me for an interview. They wanted a headline. Something sharp. I gave them a quote. Revenge is noisy. Boundaries are silent. I chose boundaries. They used it as the title. I didn't care if it trended. I just wanted it on record that I wasn't fighting anymore. I was protecting. And that was enough. The first time I saw David after the case ended, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was on a sidewalk. Mid-morning. I was leaving a meeting at the municipal building when I caught him in my periphery. He was walking toward me, alone, eyes low, no usual confidence in his step. I didn't change direction. I didn't pause. I just kept walking. He stopped. Macy, he said, like the name itself might still mean something to me. I didn't answer. He moved to block my path, not aggressively, just enough to be noticed. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I waited. For all of it, he added. I stood there, letting the moment stretch. Then I said, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry it cost you. He blinked. That's not fair. No, I said. But it's true. Then I walked past him without looking back. That was the last time I saw him. Some people think closure comes from confrontation. That once you face the person who wronged you and say what needs to be said, you'll feel better. You don't. Not always. Sometimes you feel exactly the same, except now you've wasted more breath. My life didn't become brighter after that. It became cleaner. The distractions were gone. The noise, the attempts to win back people who never saw me clearly in the first place, it all fell away. The resource office I opened started getting traction. Not big, not loud, but consistent. Word spread. A designer who'd lost rights to her own portfolio. A community organizer whose work was repackaged by a larger nonprofit. A junior analyst whose slide decks kept appearing in someone else's pitch. They came in hesitant. Left steadier. We didn't call it justice. We called it accuracy. One afternoon, while reviewing a licensing agreement for a first-time author, I got a letter forwarded from my old university. Handwritten. Neat. You probably don't remember me. I was a year behind you in law school. You once shared your outlines with me before midterms. I just passed the bar. I watched everything you did over the last year. And I wanted to say, you gave people like me a map. I folded the letter and tucked it inside a notebook I kept, not for cases, but for reminders. Later that week, I ran into Cassandra in a bookstore. We talked briefly. No big updates. She had found a new job compliance team at a small but transparent firm. She said it felt strange, being in a place where no one was watching to use her silence. I asked if she ever regretted sending the file. No, she said. But sometimes I regret not doing it sooner. I understood that too well. Because no matter how public the outcome was, the internal work of rebuilding trust in yourself, that takes longer. That's the kind of slow healing that doesn't come with applause or headlines. It comes when you're alone and choose not to reopen a wound just because it's quiet. It comes when you let yourself exist outside of someone else's shadow and no longer flinch at the idea of being fully visible. One night, I stayed late at the office to finish a case brief. On the way out, I saw a young woman, barely 20, waiting nervously outside. She had a folder clutched to her chest. I asked if she had an appointment. She didn't. She just wanted to ask a question. Her startup team had registered her code without her name. She didn't know if she was overreacting. You're not, I told her. You're just on time. I invited her inside. Made her a checklist. That's what I'd become now, a place where people came to ask the questions no one else took seriously. Not because I was perfect, but because I knew what it felt like to be told your pain was inconvenient. And I had decided, quietly, permanently, that I'd never be part of that silence again. It had been 8 months since the hearing. 6 since the investigation closed. 3 since Jeanette's name quietly disappeared from every board she once boasted about. I hadn't heard from them since David's last sidewalk apology, if you could call it that. He hadn't reached out again. Neither had anyone else from that side of my past. Not a friend of the family. Not a colleague from the firm. Not even the ones who once told me I was too talented to stay in someone else's shadow. They all disappeared the moment I stopped being convenient. But I wasn't bitter about the silence. I preferred it. It meant I could finally hear myself think. One morning, I opened an envelope from the local bar association. I'd been nominated for ethical leadership and the advancement of professional integrity. I didn't smile. I didn't mark the date on my calendar. I just folded the letter and set it aside. Recognition wasn't the goal. It never had been. Still, something about that moment made me pause. They had tried to take everything, my work, my name, my credibility. And now their names were disappearing from professional rosters while mine was being engraved on certificates I hadn't asked for. That irony didn't taste like justice. It tasted like confirmation. I'd survived the rewriting. 1 week later, I received a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't play it. But curiosity outweighed caution. It was David's father, Stuart. He sounded older. Slower. Macy, I know you don't want to hear from me. But your name came up today. I was asked why you weren't in the family archive presentation for our firm's 30-year anniversary. I didn't have an answer. That bothered me more than I expected. Just wanted to say, I see it now. What they did. What I didn't do. If that matters. He ended the call there. No request. No invitation. Just that. I didn't return it. Because I'd learned something crucial in the time since everything fell apart. Not all apologies require a response. Some people aren't looking for forgiveness. They're looking to offload guilt. And I didn't carry other people's guilt anymore. Still, that call stirred something. Not anger. Not grief. Just awareness. There would always be pieces of me embedded in places I no longer wanted to visit. Parts of my early career woven into firms and names and legacies that would never give me credit. And that was fine. I didn't need credit. I needed control. Around that time, I started receiving more inquiries from women in similar positions. Not major cases. Not scandals. Just quiet, ongoing dismissals, the kind that don't make headlines but destroy confidence one meeting at a time. A startup founder whose investor pitched her idea under his own name. A grad student whose thesis appeared, lightly edited, under her professor's byline. A social media strategist who built a brand only to be erased from the launch team. They weren't angry yet, just confused. Asking the same question I once had. Am I overreacting? My answer was always the same. You're asking the question because you already know the answer. You're just hoping someone will let you stay small. And I wouldn't be that someone. One night, I hosted a roundtable, just 5 of us. We shared stories, compared notes, laughed more than I expected, cried less than I feared. One of the women said, "This feels like a place where I can start again." It stuck with me, because starting again isn't dramatic. It's not an Instagram post or a glossy milestone. It's making space. It's deleting numbers and not explaining why. It's refusing to RSVP. It's telling your story without trying to make it sound palatable. I wasn't building a new life. I was finally living the one they tried to edit me out of.